The courtroom was alive with the usual hum of anticipation. Lawyers shuffled papers. Spectators whispered in hushed tones. In the distance, the sound of a gavel echoed from another chamber. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat at the bench, her gaze steady and professional. It was another day, another case. At least, that's what she thought. The bailiff called the next case, the State of Louisiana versus James Anderson. Eleanor shifted slightly in her seat, her hands resting on the polished oak of the bench. She glanced at the papers in front of her. Assault, robbery, resisting arrest. A familiar ache of disappointment settled in her chest. Another lost soul tangled in the system, she thought. When the defendant was brought in, her world tilted. The man standing before her, shackled at the wrists and ankles, was not a stranger. He was James Anderson, her James. Her throat tightened as a flood of memories came rushing back. The summer afternoons they spent racing bicycles down the dusty streets of Hammond, Louisiana. The late-night talks under the magnolia tree in her backyard. The promises they made as kids to always have each other's backs, no matter what. But the man standing before her wasn't the boy she remembered. His shoulders were slumped, his face lined with years of hardship. Yet his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, were unmistakable. Eleanor's grip on the gavel faltered. For the first time in her career, she hesitated. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in as she tried to process the impossible. James looked up, his expression a mix of shock and resignation. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he quickly looked away, bowing his head slightly. The courtroom waited. Eleanor forced herself to speak. "Mr. Anderson, you stand accused of assault and robbery. How do you plead?" James's voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her heart pounded. She wanted to stop everything, to demand answers. What had happened to him? How had their lives gone in such different directions? But her role as a judge demanded control. "Proceed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. As the prosecutor began his opening statement, Eleanor's mind drifted. This wasn't just any case. This was James, and somehow she had to figure out how to separate her past from her present before it was too late. The courtroom blurred as her thoughts carried her back in time, before the black robe, before the gavel, before duty took over her life. She and James had grown up on opposite sides of Hammond, Louisiana, divided not by distance but by the unspoken rules of their segregated town. Her family's house was small but neat, a white picket fence marking its borders. James's family lived at the end of a dirt road, their home weathered but full of life. Their friendship had been unexpected. She remembered the day they met, an accidental encounter at the creek behind her yard. She had wandered too far, and James was there, struggling with a tangled fishing line. She'd offered to help, and that small moment turned into years of secret adventures and shared dreams. "Eleanor," he had once said, lying beside her on the grass under a sky full of stars, "you ever think about leaving this place? Like really leaving? Somewhere people don't look at us funny just for sitting together?" She laughed, brushing off the thought. But James wasn't joking. Even as a child, he saw the world clearly, a place that didn't always make room for people like him. Their bond deepened despite the whispers, the stares, and the quiet disapproval from both families. But the weight of the world was always there, and one day it all came crashing down. It was the summer before high school when Eleanor's father found them sitting together on the porch. His voice had been cold and sharp with anger. "Eleanor, get inside, now." She hesitated, glancing at James. He stood still, eyes full of sadness. "Go on," he said softly. "I'll see you around." But they never saw each other again. Her father forbade her from going near him, and soon after, James's family moved away. Eleanor buried herself in schoolwork, determined to make herself something. She studied law, believing she could fight for justice, but she never forgot the boy who had once shown her what courage meant. Now, sitting on the bench, she wondered what had become of him after that day. His record showed small offenses, petty theft, loitering, nothing violent. But what could a few lines on paper really reveal about a person's life? The prosecutor's voice pulled her back to the present. He described the alleged crime, a robbery at a convenience store in Baton Rouge. The clerk had minor injuries, and the cash drawer was emptied. James had been found a few blocks away, with the money supposedly in his possession. Eleanor studied him as the prosecutor spoke. His posture was slouched, his hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. Did he really do it, or was there more to this than met the eye? When court recessed for lunch, Eleanor retreated to her chambers. Her assistant, Margaret, entered hesitantly. "Judge Hayes, are you all right? You seemed distracted." Eleanor paused. Should she admit the truth? That she knew the man on trial? No. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just a lot on my mind." But she wasn't fine. How could she be? The past she had buried so deeply was sitting in her courtroom waiting for her judgment. The next morning, the court was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, pens ready. The prosecutor, a stern man named Richard Powell, stood confidently before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about violence. A man who attacked an innocent clerk and stole from his store. The evidence will prove that James Anderson is guilty." Eleanor felt a knot tighten in her stomach. His tone was so detached, as if James was just another name on a page. She looked at James, his eyes downcast, his jaw tight. Then the defense attorney, Lisa Porter, rose, young, confident, and determined. "The prosecution wants you to think this case is simple, but it's not. My client has said from the start that he is innocent. We will show you that assumptions were made that night, assumptions that do not hold up." The first witness was the store clerk. He described seeing a man in a red hoodie arguing with the cashier before lunging over the counter. His story was vivid, but something about it seemed rehearsed. Lisa stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Chambers, you said the man was wearing a red hoodie. Did you see his face clearly?" "Not really. It was dark and his hood was up." "So," she said, pacing slowly, "so you can't say for sure that it was Mr. Anderson?" "Well, no, but—" "No further questions." Eleanor noticed James shift slightly in his chair. His shoulders straightened. Maybe there was hope. Next came the surveillance video. The footage was grainy, poorly lit. It showed a figure in a red hoodie, but the face was impossible to make out. The video cut off abruptly, leaving an uneasy silence in the room. James's defense centered on an alibi. He said he had walking home from a friend's house, but the friend refused to testify, afraid of local retaliation. Lisa argued that fear didn't make James guilty, but Eleanor could see doubt on the jury's faces. As the hours passed, Eleanor felt the weight of her role pressing down harder. She was supposed to be impartial, but how could she be, when every memory of James reminded her of who he used to be? At the end of the day, she stayed behind, alone in the courtroom. Her fingers brushed the edge of the gavel. She wanted to speak to him, to ask what really happened, but she couldn't. Any contact would be unethical. As she watched the bailiff lead James away, her resolve cracked. For the first time, Eleanor wondered if justice, true justice, was even possible.